Hello, welcome to BREADCAST, everyone. I am American Johnson.
And I'm Luna.
Who said their name better? I bet it was me.
Well, yeah.
I bet the audience thinks I said my name better. How are you doing? Say your name, everybody. Everyone say your name. Everyone introduce yourself. It's an unjustified hierarchy that only the hosts introduce themselves at the beginning of a show. Everyone must introduce yourself now to prevent authoritarian domination of this space that we've all created here.
Hair yet.
This is Luna's like little subtle way to show off her hair, because you know how I know? Because 5 seconds before we started streaming, she looked at herself on the screen and she went, "My hair looks so beautiful."
No, I said your hair looks beautiful.
You did not. I even asked you to confirm. I even said, "Did you say your hair looks so beautiful?" And you went,
No,
"Yes."
I thought that you said quote unquote. But I said your hair. I literally mean your elephant trunk right
Luna's
here.
like, "Oh, my hair. I can't do anything with it."
Oh, gosh. I said your hair looks beautiful.
She's like flowing her silky locks all over the place. And she's like, "What am I going to do with this hair?"
I said your hair was beautiful.
Well, your hair is beautiful too. Was that a beta move I just made? I think I'm pretty sure I just leaned into Luna and she stood vertically. Uh-oh. Someone draw the green lines. Someone get the incels in with the analysis. We need the incel analysis. Pretty sure I was the soy boy.
Okay, I like my own hair too. Well, we do all like our own hair.
Your hair looks awesome, actually, to be honest, on screen.
Do you have to say it is on screen?
No, I mean on screen and off, but I'm saying, forget it. My hair looks actually better, I think, in real life than on screen, because I got this. It's still a little thin here from where the great chop job of, what was that, April? May? Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to assume, because last few times you said you couldn't hear, I'm talking to you, the audience, finally. We're going to assume you can't hear the construction. And if the construction does become annoying, then let us know.
Yeah.
It's very loud to us, but we're going to try to just ignore it, because the last few times y'all said you didn't hear it. So, How old am I? Why no gray hair? Okay, that's apparently a failure of the camera, because I have a lot of gray hair.
Yes. Gray. She didn't see the gray in the beard. The same thing with his
I'm
hair.
39 and a half. I'm 39, but I'm almost 40. That's how I like to put it. I got gray in my beard. I've got gray temples now. I like to call it the distinguished look. Is EJ secretly? I'm non-binary. That's no secret. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Where are we? I got the flag today, by the way. Flying.
No. Okay.
I don't know where my other pins
my
went.
gosh, my tits is broken. I have to fix it. All right, beautiful.
Now. All right, enough about our personal appearances, Luna. Jeez, you're milking it.
Jeez Louise. Okay.
I'm just going back through the chat. I wanted to see who said their name better, because nobody ever introduced themselves.
Blood tofu? Is that a thing called blood tofu?
Oh, we got a few people introducing themselves. Isaac. Batstoo, hello.
Hello.
Vince, welcome.
Vince.
I have a feeling some of these might be fake names, but I don't know. All right.
Dorian Sapien said, "I don't hear construction noise so far."
Good. Excellent. I think that's the StreamYard noise reduction feature doing its job, so that's good. Here we are. I don't look a day over 30, Matthew says. Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate you. 30 was a good age.
30 is a good age.
30 was a good age for me. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Yes. If you're not familiar with the situation in France, I'm actually for once kind of know what's going on. I didn't have to I didn't have to do too much emergency investigation. I've been a little bit familiar with this for a while. I have friends who are French, and I have a couple of people I know who are, familiar with the northern African community in France, so I
Mm.
know a little bit about what's going on.
Mm.
Not an expert by any means,
Mm.
you know, so just to get that out of the way.
France is fake.
We don't like to, yeah, France is fake. We don't like to overstate our credentials and bona fides. So just let you know, I'm not an expert on France,
Yeah.
but I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And I can also dispel some myths right away. So one thing to
Mm.
say is that okay, look, it's just in the sake of accuracy. It doesn't really matter too much if the people involved with the uprising right now, and we're calling it an uprising, not a riot, not a unrest. It's an uprising, and the people involved with it predominantly are not recent immigrants. Now, that's not to say, I mean, I'm sure recent immigrants in France have every right to be pissed off and rising up as well, but most of the people in these communities have been there since the 60s and 70s, and it's the direct result of colonialism.
Yeah.
So France, you know, colonized Northern Africa and Vietnam and many other regions in the world starting in the 19th century. You know, towards the end of World War II, they didn't just give up all their colonial conquests, as we know from Vietnam, right? It was like a long, arduous, like they had to be, you know, the people had to rise up and basically overthrow the French colonialism in most places.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people started, I mean, think about it, you know, you live in this country and like Vietnam's a good example. You know, you live in this country that has been completely brutally dominated. You've had all of your wealth stripped out and stolen from you for decades, you know, close to a century. Such was the case in Northern Africa as well.
Mm-hmm.
And your country is left just completely ruined. I mean, devastated. In Vietnam's case, bombed the Stone Age, but certainly Northern Africa, devastated.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of people in those situations, some of the only opportunities they have to feed and protect their families are in the heart of the empire, right? It's the same reason why a lot of people from South America and Mexico go to the USA, because their nations have been so brutally dominated and just devastated for so long. There are very few opportunities by design because of capitalist imperialism. And the only opportunities are in the empire, right? In the belly of the beast. So a lot of people moved to France from Northern Africa in the 60s and 70s and have been there for a long time. And France has had this incredibly fucked up set of policies, I guess you could say, program, where they have ghettoized these people, okay, and forced them to live in these like suburban ghettos where they're essentially cut off from French society. And simultaneously, they have been forcing these people from Northern Africa and other former colonial regions to assimilate. It's like the assimilation strategy. So they're saying you have to act French, you have to adopt French culture, but you can't actually join the French community. You can't actually come into you can't actually live in our community.
Second-class citizen who like been cut off all from their culture, their history, their people, their language.
100%. And they did the same thing to the Vietnamese. This is the French playbook.
Yes.
Okay. Remember, the Vietnamese, Luna is the one that taught me this, were not allowed to participate in French society.
No.
They did not want French people joining them at their social events and their social gatherings and that sort of thing. Even when it came to women, they wanted them sexualized, but on the periphery of society. Yeah. Right. And, but at the same time, they wanted them to adopt French culture, and they were teaching them French in schools, and they were trying to get them to, you know, basically see French culture as superior to Vietnamese culture.
They intentionally made Vietnamese people illiterate. That was why in 1945, when we had our first communist revolution, over 90% of Vietnamese population didn't know how to read and write.
Yes.
Because the nearly 100 years of colonialism by the and they literally like they made us a second-class citizen right in on our homeland. We didn't learn how to read and write. We didn't know our history. We didn't know any better, and our sole purpose was to serve our master, which is our French masters. Mm-hmm. But we were taught, Vietnamese people, we were taught to be ashamed of our, you know, skin and our kind of look, but also at the same time be proud to be servant of French people. At the same time, they use demagoguery, you know, and racism and brainwashing on our own people. It was horrible.
Real quick, we got a super chat from Gio. Thank you so much. I wish we could show the super sticker on the stream with StreamYard, because it's a hippopotamus, I think, in a office chair having
I love
having a race of some sort.
Chair race.
Chair race. I love it. Thank you, Gio, for the super sticker. We appreciate you. You can, if anybody wants to support the stream, you can donate at streamelements.com/noncompete/tip. We are monitoring and standing by. But anyway, okay, so the French kind of adopted this strategy where they were like basically simultaneously asking their colonial subjects to assimilate but stay out of the French society.
Yes.
So in other words, it's like, we want you to act French, but we don't want to be around you.
Yes.
It's like really, really
It's
disgusting.
fucking racist.
Yeah, it's 100% racist. So that's been happening for decades to these people in France. And so it's really no wonder that they're having an uprising right now, because they've just been horribly subjugated for decades, right? This has been a long time brewing. Now, I want to show something real quick just to talk about the doctrinal language being used and the propagandistic elements at play here right now. And if you think you are immune to propaganda, I want you to pay attention to what's happening in the media right now, because I was noticed when I was scrolling through the news today, it was all riots, violence, this, calls for it to stop, everything like that, right? And it's like it felt a lot like the early era of the uprising in 2020 in the USA. And so as I was curious, so I did a Google Trends search. Google Trends is a great resource for sort of trying to understand how people, how the media especially is being manipulated and
pushing out those you call like keywords or like the hotkeys.
So if you'll remember back in March, there were some pretty heavy, I mean, you could call them protests or riots or whatever you want, but there was a lot of similar activity happening. Okay. And it was mostly, white French people, white French people. Yeah. And they were upset about the pension, the pension system being changed undemocratically, rightfully so. And they had a lot of unrest or whatever you might call it. So during that time, and I found that this was the biggest period of time when it was being covered. So the heaviest period of like rioting or whatever you want to call it, unrest, uprising, whatever. If you look at the terms France riots versus France protests, right?
Okay.
And remember, they were burning things. They were like overturning police cars. They were fighting the cops in the streets. Okay. You could very much call it a riot if you wanted to phrase it that way. Or you could call it a protest. And you can see that overwhelmingly the red line is protests. Okay.
Protest.
Overwhelmingly on websites that Google tracks, the word protest is being used. Overwhelmingly.
Yes.
I mean, 100 to 22. It's like 5-to-1 ratio most of the time. Okay. Even at like the, most, even when the lines are the closest together, it's like 4 to 25. It's 13 to 35. I mean, it's like exponential, right?
Yeah.
So now let's look at the same phenomenon, but in the last 7 days. Okay. Because the last 7 days is when the Northern African community has been engaging in the same activity.
Look at that, people.
You can see the blue line is riots.
Jeez,
and it's like even more exponentially more than protests.
It's like fucking 8-to-1, 9-to-1, almost 10-to-1.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
So what's the difference here? Honestly, ask yourself, what's the difference? Why is the media and why on social media are these terms being pushed so much harder?
That's racism detected. Look at that.
Racism,
Pig
certainly
racism.
Detected. So we have a difference in the way that violence is perceived with the white French people protesting about their pensions.
When the right race, quote unquote, do it, it's protest. It's very like justifiable. But when the wrong races do it, it must be violent and it must be riot. It must be something evil and brutal.
Now, I want to point something else out. It goes beyond simple race. It goes beyond racism. Okay, it goes beyond racism. I'm not saying it's not racist. It is racist.
Yes.
This is not a yes. This is not a but. This is a yes and. It is racist, but the other reason that this difference is so striking is the difference in the nature of the demands and the difference in the nature of the threat to the French capitalists and the international capitalists by extension. What do I mean by that? The French uprising, protest, whatever, over pensions was limited in scope enough that it was just about pensions.
Yeah.
And the only thing that was at stake was the pension system. And you could easily salvage the pension system without threatening the entire structure of the French ruling class.
Yes.
And the international ruling class by extension. Whereas this is an uprising by colonially subjugated people, racially subjugated people, ghettoized second-class citizens, as Luna said, and their demands for equality and fair treatment and just being treated as human beings threatens that social fabric and the, more importantly, material fabric of the capitalist mode of production in France. Because colonialism and imperialism and the subjugation of a certain strata of workers is part of the material basis of French capitalism.
Exactly.
So it's much more pressing and urgent for capitalists around the world to put an end to this uprising, just as was the case in 2020 in the USA. Yes, the 2020 uprising was about racism. It was also about protecting the material basis of the capitalist mode of production.
Police brutality.
Why did the police exist?
The whole system of police.
Why did the police exist? To protect the capitalist mode of production.
Hunters,
exactly,
like catchers.
It's all part and parcel, right? We're not saying that these things are, and it's very important to understand this. I'm not saying that these things are competing with each other, like racism versus capitalism. It's all the same construct. It's all the same thing.
They intertwine with each other.
Racism exists and the police state exists to protect and further the interests of capital.
Yes, the dominance of
all these things have a material basis, and the material basis is the capitalist mode of production.
Yes.
That's why we as communists need to fight so hard against racism and against the bourgeois police state and against colonialism and imperialism.
Yeah.
And by the way, side note, these same dynamics exist with transphobia and ableism and countless other forms of oppression.
Sexism.
That's why we need to be uniting the working class by undoing the rifts and divisions that the capitalist class intentionally massages into the working class. And we're going to talk about that today. Now,
wasn't it a little bit bigger than pensions only?
Yeah, it was bigger than pensions, but that was the flashpoint.
The main point. Yeah.
But the point is, I don't believe now. Feel free to. Maybe I'm wrong, because again, we're not experts on France. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't see anything to indicate that those uprisings in March and in February, it was actually from January through March, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen anything to indicate that those uprisings posed a significant threat to the capitalist basis of French capitalism, the material basis of French capitalism, right? I feel like they were basically asking for reform, and they were basically. I saw Macron try hiding $6 million of his $6 million watch in an interview, telling working class they had to sacrifice their pensions for the economy to prevent to appear hypocritical. Yes, I remember seeing that video clip as well. Yes, but yeah, there's a difference between people asking for reforms and saying they don't like the current administration and the policies of the current administration versus people who are. Okay, I'm going to give you a little sneak preview of what we're about to talk about today. Last week we talked about, and we're going to continue talking about this. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the foundations and the origins of fascism. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about George Jackson. Yeah. And I was going to play a clip of George Jackson speaking about fascism, but then I started reading his book, Blood in My Eye. Yeah. And I found that what he's saying in that book really lines up with what we were saying the last couple of weeks. Yeah. And that George Jackson's definition of fascism is actually Luna. You haven't read this book yet. So this is your first exposure to these ideas. I'm curious what you think about them. Oh. George Jackson's definition of fascism, when you pull it out, and he doesn't present Parenti and Jackson. Neither one of them give you a straightforward definition of fascism. There's kind of a reason for that, and it's because fascism's constantly changing and that sort of thing. But they both point out 3 essential properties of fascism, and they're the exact same 3 essential properties.
Wow.
So, maybe Parenti was reading George Jackson. I wouldn't be surprised, but it's just, it reinforces that people who have thought deeply about this seem to be coming to the same conclusions, that fascism has these 3 essential properties. And we'll go over all that in a second. But one of the things that, why was I saying this? So one of the things that George Jackson was talking about is how people who are on the lower rungs of the working class have the most revolutionary potential, right? Obviously, because they're the most oppressed by capitalism. As Marx said, they have nothing to lose but their chains.
Yes.
And capitalism has not spent resources buying off their complicity or making concessions to that lower strata, right? So we're talking about poor people, marginalized people, vulnerable people, people who are, racially subjugated. In the modern era, I would say trans people. Always trans people, but it's coming to a boiling point right now, et cetera. Anyway, so those people have the most revolutionary potential. And so in a very kind of, you could call it late stage capitalism, you could call it an imperialist nation, you could call it maybe even, according to Jackson, a fascist nation. But in these nations where the capitalists have a really, really strong grip, and they're very, very powerful, and they're very entrenched, and they totally control the media and the propaganda apparatus, they use violence and terrorism to subjugate the most vulnerable and oppressed people, whereas they use the propaganda machinery to subjugate and pacify people who have more privilege, who Engels might call the bourgeois proletariat. And we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that in a lot more detail coming up.
I can talk a lot more about the bourgeois proletariat.
But there's a reason for that, and it's because they don't want... So one of the arguments George Jackson makes that we'll get into is that the proletariat in the USA... George Jackson was talking very specifically about the USA. So George Jackson, little biography. George Jackson was a imprisoned black man. He was in prison on and off, but mostly in prison from the age of 15 until his death when he was, I think, 31, something like that. He died in 1971 during a prison revolt. And he wrote extensively in prison. He did a lot of interviews while he was in prison, which I really recommend you check those out. They're very interesting. He has a very interesting perspective. Not everything George Jackson had to say was great. Okay. There were some issues that I have seen with like sexism and other issues like that. So we always, want to be critical and aware when we're reading. Like nobody's 100% right about everything. But when it comes to analyzing fascism and the nature of the state in the USA, I think he did a pretty good job, and it's worth listening to, worth reading. And I think in the context of France, it's interesting because we're talking about a very marginalized community, like intentionally marginalized for decades. And it's kind of it's got a lot of similarities to the black community in the USA, but then there are also differences as well. And we can, I don't even think it's my place or Luna's place to talk about that because we don't really know enough about it. But certainly there are structural similarities in what's going on. So we are going to read a little bit of Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. Just checking out the chat real quick. Oh, yeah. Well, not only are pensions basically extinct and replaced by 401k, but most people don't even have a 401k. And there's a lot. I would love to I need to do a video about this one day because 401ks make workers way less stable.
Yes.
Like imagine retiring during a recession.
On your stock market.
Yeah. Imagine retiring during a recession, right?
Yeah.
And then but at the same time, it makes workers like less stable. And this really does have to do with the dynamics we're going to be talking about today. It also makes workers who do have 401ks and who have done fairly well financially in terms of income and that sort of thing, on a working class, relative to most of the rest of the working class, it makes them far more likely to become bourgeois proletariat.
Yes.
In other words,
because it makes them align with the interests of the bourgeoisie.
Exactly. Which Engels talked about. Gramsci talked about it a little. Lots of people that I've read talk about this, and the Vietnamese communists talked about this a lot too. So you have there's a difference, by the way, just real quick. there's a difference between the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeois proletariat.
Yes.
And we won't get into it too deeply right now, but the petty bourgeoisie are people who basically like kind of own their own personal means of production,
but still being exploited by the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, well, yeah, the petty bourgeoisie. Well, both. There's something that the petty bourgeoisie and the bourgeois proletariat have in common, which is that, in truth, their interests align with the proletariat completely. But both of these elements also have a great deal of false consciousness that makes them think that their interests align with the bourgeoisie. But the petty bourgeoisie kind of own their own means of production. And there's a lot of different ways that people kind of define it, especially today, since things have changed a lot since Marx and Engels were writing. But for the most part, you can think of people who like kind of run their own small business. Right? They're not like the big capitalists who control the system of capitalism, but they do own their own means of production in some way. They might have a few employees. Some of them just are self-employed, whatever. But the bourgeois proletariat are workers. They work for a company, for a corporation, for a capitalist. But for whatever reason, either because they are benefiting from imperialism or because they have enough income that they kind of become, you could call them labor aristocracy, or because they are maybe like middle managers who serve the interests of capital directly in their day-to-day affairs. These people essentially align with the bourgeoisie and fight for the agenda of the bourgeoisie.
Exactly.
Despite being workers.
Is it the proletariat now, want the lines must go up.
Line go up. And, there's the capitalists, and George Jackson talks about this a bit. Capitalists make concessions and also design systems to foster this betrayal, class betrayal.
Yeah.
And
the system intentionally make you be like that.
So if you have a 401k and your retirement is directly tied to that 401k and you're getting pretty close to retirement, you literally have a material interest in capitalists gaining more wealth and power and domination because your retirement fund is directly tied to the success, to whether capitalists succeed or fail. And remember that there's this common myth that I especially see with right-wing libertarians that stocks, the very nature of stock ownership means that capitalism is very democratic and that everyone, you and me, workers and everybody, we all own corporations together. There's no such thing as this capitalist proletariat divide. I've seen this myth so many times. It's bullshit because stock ownership inequality is far worse than fiat currency wealth inequality. So there's even more of a wealth gap between the capitalist class who own the overwhelming majority of stocks and the working class.
It makes me feel achy just having a phone.
Yeah, but what choice do you have, right?
What choice do you have? You have no choice.
That's the way the capitalists designed it on purpose. You don't have a choice.
Yes.
Either
this or nothing.
It's literally a ride or die situation.
Yeah.
Ride with capitalism or die.
Yes.
Those are the options, especially as you get older and especially as they start to think about raising the retirement age in the USA to like over 70. And yeah, as Pana Rosa says, you have to have millions of dollars worth of stock in a single company to have a voting interest. Imagine you own your like shitty, like how much? Okay, like let's see. What does one share in Google cost right now?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Just using Google as a random example. $120 for a share in Google.
For one share.
So if you spent, let's see, I'm going to think of what's a good chunk of money for like any worker, like a lot of money for any worker. Let's say $25,000. Yes. A lot. Okay.
That's a lot.
If you had $25,000, which I don't think I've ever had $25,000 in my bank account in my entire life ever.
Of course not me.
Or like in my assets, but okay, 25,000 divided by 120. So you would own 208 shares. Now, how many shares of Google are there? There are 12 billion 781 million shares.
With $25,000.
So if you had 25,000, I mean, $25,000 is more than most of us are ever going to see in our entire life. We're never going to see that in our bank account.
What about your entire 401k?
Yeah, I mean, like if you put your entire, like let's say you have a pretty good 401k. Let's say you have
let's say 401k.
Let's say you have $500,000.
Let's say,
and it's all in Google.
$1 million. All right.
And you would have 4,166 shares out of 12 billion.
It's like nothing.
It
dude.
doesn't strike me as particularly egalitarian or democratic. Some people might not realize, like with the rule of large numbers, right? When numbers are this big, it's like hard for us to calculate them. If you have 5,000 shares out of 12 billion.
But if I buy a stock, I get a say in how the company is run, of course. Right?
Wait. Let me get the calculator back up because I want to know what percentage. Because people, it's like 5,000 sounds like a lot. Like, ooh, I own 5,000 shares in Google. But
now it's 4,000. It's only 4,000. It's not 5,000.
I know. I'm going bigger.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm going bigger. I'm saying you have even more invested.
Okay.
Is that right? That's 12 billion. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
No, that's wrong. I did that math wrong.
Yes.
It should be the other way around, right?
Yes. It's
12
billion.
781. 123. Okay.
Yes. 5,000.
What am I doing wrong here?
No, it's smaller number. Divide big number and times 100.
Oh, times 100. You're right. Oh my god. All right.
It's so fucking small.
Listen, it's not 3.9%. It's 3.9% to the negative seventh. So like move the decimal point over seven places.
Yes.
So it's like 0.000000391.
Yes.
% of the stocks.
Let's say 0.0000004%.
Yeah. So anyway, no, you
That's
don't.
it.
Your 401k.
There you go.
Does not mean that you have like.
And we calculated way more than you actually have.
I know we were being extremely conservative.
Generous.
Yeah. So let's just ignore that little myth and move on. You don't have a democratic stake in Google.
6
just because
zeros. It's 6 0. Yes. Okay. We have a masters in our audience.
That's
today.
what I said, right? 7 places.
7 places, 6 zeros.
Okay.
I did 7 zeros.
For once, Luna makes the math error. For once, it wasn't me.
So the stereotype is wrong, huh?
Oh, the Asian math stereotype.
Yep.
Well, I completely never would try to pretend that I have some kind of math bona fides, that's for sure. Math is for nerds. All right.
Only nerds like math.
I'm a capitalist because I got stonk money. That is actually what right-wing libertarians and anarcho-capitalists say. It's absurd. So, all right, let's move forward. It's about 9:36, and let's talk a little more about George Jackson. So, we all know that George. We talked about how George was incarcerated for most of his life, and he wrote in prison. And it's kind of interesting. There's a Freedom Project website that you can see the list of the 99 books that Jackson owned. It's kind of like you don't usually get that intimate of insight into like a revolutionary person's headspace, because most revolutionary people were not so. I mean, there's very few people. There's like Gramsci spent most of his time writing in prison.
Yes.
And George Jackson. And Jackson's
Josh
library.
Jackson did read the Prison Diary of Ho Chi Minh.
He did. He read the Prison Diary of Ho Chi Minh. He read a lot of books about revolutionary Vietnam. Mm-hmm. He read Gramsci, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which no surprise, since Gramsci also was, in prison while he was writing. But anyway, okay. So let's share this volume by George Jackson. I am very hot. Are you hot?
No, I'm cold. Look at this. I'm turning into a cocoon right now.
You turn into a cocoon every BREADCAST.
Yes, it means I'm cold every BREADCAST.
Oh my gosh, the chat's still talking about math.
People, nerds.
They love math, Luna. We need them. We need the math people on our side for when we have to calculate things live like this.
True.
You have to remember, wait, hold on. You have to remember, not only are we not well, Luna's much better at math than I am. I will say that. But not only are we not math geeks or anything like that, but we're running a stream. We're looking at the chat. We got a bright light shining in our eyes. We got all this pressure. So yeah, we might get a decimal place wrong every so often.
Yeah.
But we got the chat here because we don't constantly call them nerds for liking math. We have the chat on our side.
I consider our chat to be the hive mind thing.
I know, but when you mercilessly bully them for loving math, you drive them away.
Oh.
So we want the math nerds on our side, Luna.
Oh.
All right.
Well, the good Marty said, "I love math," and then Jim said, "What's up?" And then Salami said, "Math." What's up, math?
Now, this is a dialectic though. We got to be careful because we want to keep the math nerds around and in our audience, but we also at the same time don't want to alienate the 99.9% of the rest of the audience that doesn't love math. So it is a balancing act, and I hope that we can all work together to keep the math people around without driving away all the non-math people. We all understand the dynamics at play. We understand the dialectic, and therefore we can manipulate the dialectic to our ends as a movement. All right.
All right. Nerds, you done talking about math in the chat yet?
Luna.
We're all nerds. I am a nerd.
All right, that's a good synthesis. We are all nerds. Everyone's a nerd in some way or another. All right, let's talk about George Jackson. Reggie, what did you miss? We were just talking about how because you own a few shares of Google doesn't mean that you have democratic control of Google.
Yeah, it doesn't mean nothing.
You basically essentially don't even have a vote, even if you have like 5,000 shares.
You have an illusion of a number that you think you own.
Right. Okay. Kill the Buddha says, I don't understand why so many people don't like math. I love math. Okay. I'm just not good at it.
You have a
math, I think math
you have a kid math song? We have.
Of course we have kid math songs, but
sing one. Kid math song.
I don't know any now.
This is like 1 + 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, 4 and 1 is 5, 5 clean fingers. I just translated into English.
We don't have anything that approaches that.
I just translated the song into English.
That blows our math songs out of the water. We had 1, 2. This is from kindergarten. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Terrible.
Something the numbers rock. But then they did it in Spanish. Uno, dos. Tres, cuatro. Oh my God. All right. Now we're going to get the Spanish speakers mad at us too. So let's just.
Do you call it Sesame Street or Sesame Street?
Neither. Not even close. Sesame Street.
Oh my gosh. I hate that word. I don't know how you say that word.
Sesame.
It's sesame.
It's not even an English word. I mean, it's not from English. I believe it's from the Middle East, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Sesame.
Sesame Street.
Anyway, all right.
All right.
We've pissed off the entire audience with our antics and our escapades. Oh, 10 Monkeys Jumping on the Bed is a math song. Oh. That's true.
Oh.
Good point.
One little duck went out one day.
Oh, there's another math song. See? We got a lot of math songs. All right. Synthesis achieved.
5 little ducks went out one day, only and they're far away. Mother duck said,
whack, 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 whack.
And only 4 little ducks came back.
Reggie, we do save the lives. That sounds very dramatic. We do save lives. We save lives every week.
We save lives every week. At least twice a week.
YouTube.com/non-compete live has the streams, and so does youtube.com/LunaOy live. So you can check out the live catalog there where we save lives every week because Luna and I are lifesavers. Well, we're live savers. I'm sorry. We're live savers.
Savers, yes.
We're not lifesavers. We're live savers. Saving lives is just what we do. The good word, he said, heroes.
Your heroes twice a week.
We save at least 2 lives every week. All right, let's go back to the reading. So this is from Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And this is, I believe it's page 118 if you happen to have the same copy we do. And you want to read
EJ
along.
does not know any French. Bonjour, merci beaucoup.
I like how they asked me if you know French.
You're right. It's like, yeah, we have to talk to me through you.
I'm the gatekeeper. I am the gatekeeper of Luna.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup.
Do you speak any French?
Je t'aime.
I think she speaks about as much French as I do.
Yes.
I took French for 3
My
years.
grandpa spoke French though. The rich grandpa.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, Luna's family's like a perfect, like, what do you call it? Microcosm of like Vietnamese history. Because
yes.
her grandpa, say it.
My grandpa, the rich from my mom's side, the rich side, the landlord side, spoke French because like it was affordable. They could afford him to go to French school to learn French. My dad then went on the USSR, Belarus, to study Russian. Me, he speak English.
Right. So, Rohan, Luna, does EJ know any French? They're asking you if I speak any French.
Can you speak some French? Speak some French.
Non. Non, non parlez-vous français. I took 3, like, this is an interesting thing about middle school. I took 3 years of French in middle school. 3 years I studied French in middle school, and I don't remember any of it at all. And there is Maria Montessori had this theory that like middle schoolers don't retain anything they learned in middle school. So they should just go like work on a farm for those 3 years.
Nemo
and socialize.
Speak some French.
Omelette du fromage. That means cheese omelet. I know that. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember a single thing I learned in middle school, including the 3 years of French.
The good morning. This is not a French sentence.
Je non parlez-vous français?
It means I know speak you French. I'm sorry, we couldn't care less about French.
Well, no, I mean, hey, I would love to speak any language. I think every language is one that I want to speak. For one thing, Luna, if you want to go to Haiti, you got to speak French.
True, huh?
So, think about it.
French is not a thing in Vietnam. I mean, a big thing anymore. Yeah, we still have a French faculty in university. I mean, yeah, most of you do that, but like generally speaking, it's not really.
It's a very important word.
Very important word. Everybody must know this word.
All right. What's wrong with our brains while we're in middle school? I think that the thing is that your brain is completely invested in learning how to socialize at that point.
Yes, your brain is being socialized, being horny.
That's a part of socialization.
Yes.
I believe, now maybe some teachers know better than me, but I believe that this has been kind of established in psychological studies, but that, yeah, when you're at that age, you're really focused on learning how to socially fit in with your peers and how to speak and how to act and get along with other
Socialize,
people.
Friends.
So, you know, the stuff that you learn in middle school just like literally doesn't go into your long-term memory, really, compared to like all the social lessons that you learn there.
Masters has a question for me, Luna. Does Vietnam have any minority languages? If so, what are some of them? Well, we have 54 ethnic minorities in Vietnam. Actually, 53 because King is like the majority.
54 ethnicities. You can say.
54 ethnicity, and 53 of them are ethnic minorities, and all of them have their own language and cultures that are protected by our constitution, and they are, freely to practice their language and their cultures.
Yeah. So, for an example, they would be learning their language in their school, right?
Yeah.
If an ethnic group, has a village or a community, then in that public school they'll be learning their own language along with the Vietnamese language.
The Vietnamese will be like the second language that they learn in school.
And the Vietnamese language is sort of a hybrid of different languages,
exactly.
right?
Vietnamese is like the hybrid of the Muong
Mhm.
language with a bunch of other ethnic minorities
Yeah.
languages too.
Okay. All right. Let's go. Let's try to get into this reading now. I feel like we're in school and like
Yeah, right.
I used to do this to my teachers.
Mm.
I used to have teachers in school and they would be like about to start the lesson and then we would ask them some question about something we know they're interested in.
Yes.
And then they would just start talking about
Dang
that.
it,
And then we
people,
wouldn't have to get into the
dang it.
reading. I used to do that all the time. Oh, Lord have mercy. All right. So, all right. This is from Blood in My Eye by George Jackson, written in prison. And this chapter is called On Withdrawal. I'm not sure if I read this like a few days ago. I can't remember if he says this explicitly at this point or not, but just to set it up, one of the observations George Jackson makes. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I haven't really decided if I completely agree with George Jackson yet on this or not. So this is something I'm still processing, but I just think these ideas are a little bit interesting and something we can explore together. George Jackson makes the argument that fascism has already completely entered its fullest stage in the USA. So he says that there are basically 3 stages of fascism.
Sorry, the chat trying so hard to distract us, but I can't read.
Just stop reading the chat.
No.
For at least while I set up the reading. There are 3 stages of fascism.
Yes,
according to George Jackson. Okay.
Yes.
Now again, I'm not sure if I fully, I don't know if I agree with this or not yet, but it's an interesting analysis, and I think it's worth listening to what Jackson has to say because Jackson was so fully affected by the U.S. prison system and everything. So anyway, Jackson says that the first stage is basically a countercultural intellectual movement, or at least that's how it presents itself, and that's how it injects itself into society. That's phase 1. And so that would be like the brown shirt phase of the Third Reich. It would be the black shirt phase of the fighting groups phase of Mussolini, when they're just entering and they act like they are an intellectual movement and that they are trying to have this pseudo revolution. That's phase 1, which Parenti talks about the pseudo revolutionary aspects of fascism as well. And then George Jackson says that stage 2 is basically this violent terrorist domination stage in which the fascists seize control of the state and they have to use extreme violence and terrorism to thoroughly subjugate the working class. Now, this is all, by the way, in line with the 3 essential properties. In fact, let's talk about that real quick. Oh, and stage 3 would just be, real quick, just to finish the 3 stages. Stage 3 would be when the state has been so established and the capitalist power behind the fascists has been so entrenched that the fascists and the capitalists now completely control the media, the press, entertainment industry, all of the opinion forming machinery of the society. And they also completely control the police and the prison systems. Yeah. So they have complete domination, and they have basically subjugated the entire working class and eliminated all organized opposition. They've defeated the revolution of communism. They've defeated the vanguard, and they've just completely become entrenched. So this is founded on 3 essential properties. And I don't really. So my answer here, Pana Rosa, is I'm not sure. I'm still processing.
Bro, we're still learning about this.
I have a feeling that Jackson is onto something here.
I agree with the point that the USA right now is the complete fascism. It means that fascism is very developed. In a sense, I'm not sure it's the last stage yet.
True. There wouldn't really be a final stage because nothing stops developing.
Complete fascism than the Nazi Germany,
right, or
the fascist Italy,
now,
or Japan.
The other question is I guess the question that I'm struggling with, just to talk about this, is the USA more like neoliberal liberal, or is it more fascist, or can those things both exist at the same time? What's the relationship between fascism and liberalism? I've long contended that at very least liberals and fascists have a bargain with each other, and they work together all the time. Vietnam's a great example of that because the fascist dictator, let's just assume that the USA was liberal in the 20th century. The fascist dictatorship in Vietnam was installed by that liberal administration. Of course, if it was a fascist administration, it would be different. But
the Democrats install the fascist dictatorship.
I think that there are wings of the Capitalist Party too. You know, the Capitalist, not the Capitalist Party, the Capitalist class. It's not like monolithic entirely. They do have like class solidarity.
Yeah.
But some elements of the capitalist class are more liberal, and then some are more fascistic and have more radical agendas. And fascists, I think, serve the radical agenda of capitalism, things like colonialism and the complete subjugation of the working class and that sort of thing. And fascists often, as a movement, I mean, that's how they get power. The capitalists basically see the promise that the fascists have. Like, oh, if you put us in power, we'll give you colonialism, we'll completely wipe out communism, we'll completely subjugate unions and that sort of thing. And that's what causes capitalists to filter out those elements of fascism and you know, give them power and that sort of thing. So, all right, let's talk about the 3 essential properties of fascism according to Parenti that we talked about the last couple of weeks, and compare them to George Jackson's 3 essential properties. Okay, so Parenti says that the 3 essential properties are: 1, pseudo-revolution. Forgive my handwriting.
Yes, it's okay.
At least you can hopefully read it.
Yes.
2 is incoherent mass appeals to the working class. I'm still getting used to writing on this screen too, so.
Yeah.
And then 3 would be rationally serves the capitalist agenda. I'll just say rationally serves capital. Okay?
Yes.
Those are the 3 essential elements of fascism, the properties of fascism according to Parenti. So pseudo-revolution means that the fascists present themselves as a revolutionary force, and they act like they're going to completely change society.
Yeah, just like Mussolini and Hitler did the same thing of calling, you know, for the change of Italy and the change of German.
Right.
The same as Japan, who literally, like, you know, the Meiji King called for that's westernized, at least industrialized Japan, so they can bring wealth and then reform the country, to change the country, you know. Pol Pot was absolutely appeal as a revolutionist, you know, want to bring Kampuchea out of imperialism, blah blah blah, and bring make the Kampuchea people, you know, become like superior.
Yeah. But of course, all of these movements are not actually revolutionary. They're actually simply serving the radical interests of the bourgeoisie and the status quo.
It's a cover. Revolutionary is just a cover for them.
Okay.
Super chat from Christopher Roberts.
Oh, Christopher Roberts. Hello, welcome. We haven't heard from you in a while. Says, thank you for the super chat. Says, I think the only thing in our favor in the USA is that the fascists are not united. They have different wings fighting each other everywhere. I mean, that was true, of course, you have to remember, that was true in the Third Reich.
Yeah.
For example, there was a lot of power struggling going on in the Third Reich throughout the 20s and even into the 30s until the Strasserites were all dispatched with the Night of Long Knives.
Yeah, and then they were assassinated by Hitler later.
You also have to remember that the fascist elements are all, they might be struggling with each other, but they're all serving the agenda of the capitalist class. And you have to remember the material basis of fascism is capitalism, right? Fascism wouldn't exist without capitalism, especially not in the form that it has taken. And capitalists are the one that filter out the elements of the different fascist splinter groups or factions, or whatever you call them, and elevate the ones that serve their agenda the best. That's why in the Third Reich, the pro-bourgeoisie elements, the more pro-bourgeoisie elements of the Nazi Party were elevated, and the Strasserites, who were, I want to be careful when I say this too, the Strasserites were somewhat less pro-bourgeoisie, and that's why they were eliminated. I will not say that they were anti-bourgeoisie, because if you look at the actual program of the Strasserites, they weren't really nearly as revolutionary as they would have you believe. They were not for proletarian revolution. They were not even really for class war. They were really kind of like Nazi sockdems, like they were reformists, I would say. They wanted to like reform capitalism. So they were even like pro-bourgeoisie, but not as pro-bourgeoisie as the Hitler branch. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. The Proud Boys and the Rose City Nationals ended up brawling in Portland when they tried to protest Pride. Yeah, which we've seen that. I mean, there were the Freikorps were brawling with each other, and the Night of the Long Knives, the Hitlerites just straight up murdered the Strasserites. So, it's not something that's unprecedented in other fascist movements.
The communists, the soldiers, they kill themselves.
Oh yeah,
They assassinated themselves so they can get higher into position. I mean, it's like, it's a thing. I don't know how to explain it to you. It is a thing like when you unite only based on the thirst of power and the evilness in you. On one hand, yes, you unite together to oppress other people, but on the other hand, you always willing to kill each other so you can have more of a saying or like power, something like that.
This is a total side question. So let's take a little break because I want to just talk about this real quick because it's an interesting question. But John Doe says, I don't understand why some people say nationalizing things is not inherently socialist. Nationalizing a business gets rid of its profit motive. How would it still be capitalist? Well, let's talk about that, okay? Because fascists may have an incentive. Because the reason I want to talk about this is because it gets brought up a lot when people try to do horseshoe theory and say that like socialists are really fascist or fascists are really socialists and shit like that. And some of the evidence they use is the fact that like sometimes fascists will nationalize certain things or whatever. Now, there are lots of reasons why liberals and fascists might want to nationalize something. One is that, I mean, first of all, it will always just be because it somehow or another serves the material interests of the bourgeoisie, the rational interests of the bourgeoisie. So an example of that might be you might want to nationalize a train system because it actually does make things cheaper for capitalists to make money. And in that sense, maybe one capitalist who, maybe the capitalists, the smaller group of capitalists who own the train system lose out, but the vast majority of capitalists would win out because it just makes things better for them. Or in the USA, a lot of times they have this kind of sabotage oriented nationalism strategy where they will nationalize something intending to destroy it. It doesn't happen often, but anytime that you have government intervention in the USA, it's sabotaged by especially the Republican wing of the liberals, and they will just basically, maybe have a little bit more government regulation or nationalization, and then they'll say, "Oh, look, see, it doesn't work," after they completely sabotage it. Therefore, we need to just privatize everything. So there's lots of different reasons why it might happen. In other words,
it matters a lot when who do it,
who's doing it, why are they doing it, and how are they doing it. In other words, we don't want to be metaphysical when we look at anything like this. You can't just say like, okay, nationalization is metaphysically always socialist, and there's never a situation where nationalizing something's not socialist. That's a metaphysical way of looking at things. You have to look at the relationships, the patterns of development, have a historical and comprehensive analysis. That's what dialectical materialism is all about. So starve the beast, right? That's what they call that. Rohan says starve the beast is the name of that strategy of like maybe having the government take something over and then just completely fucking it up. Mengistu of Ethiopia was pretty much like Pol Pot. Thank you for the super chat. I have not heard of Mengistu.
Wow, Mengistu.
We'll have to look into that.
Have to look, yes.
It rings a bell.
Yeah.
So I guess I've read about it at some point, but yeah. I guess we'll have to check that. Add that to our show notes, Luna.
Yeah.
Mengistu.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for the super chat. That's something we will look into. And if anybody ever has anything they want us to like know about, just let us know. We've learned a lot from the chat.
Yeah.
So it's very useful to get tipped off on things like that. I learned about a horrible fascist eugenicist from Luna's comments the other day because a fascist was promoting him. We, of course, hid that fascist from the channel. That's a little bit less good. Okay.
Wow. He was charged with genocide against humanity, crimes against humanity. Wow.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to look more into that. Yeah. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to the reading. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Actually, let's go back to this. Okay. So we've got our, if you'll remember, we just summarized the three definitions of the three essential properties of fascism according to Parenti. Pseudo-revolution, incoherent appeals to the working class, and rationally serving capitalist interests. Okay. There are thousands and thousands of variants of fascism that have cropped up over the years. And in recent years, we've seen a huge explosion of all these different fascist ideologies and crypto-fascist movements couching themselves as communists and that sort of thing. But they all have these three essential properties. They all exist essentially to serve the radical interests of the bourgeoisie by eradicating communism and tricking the proletariat into serving the agenda of the bourgeoisie through a pseudo-revolution.
Yes.
Okay. George Jackson has all of these properties. George Jackson talks about how capitalism serves the bourgeoisie. Okay. That's one of the essential elements that Jackson describes in Blood in My Eye. Okay. George Jackson talks about the nature of disguise. Okay. Like, in other words, fascism has an inherent intrinsic property of disguising itself and pretending to be something that it's not. Okay. And I think that lines up pretty well with the incoherent appeals to the working class, because they're disguising themselves. They're pretending that they want to further the interests of the working class, but really they're serving the interests of the bourgeoisie. So that disguise aspect, I think, lines up perfectly with point number 2. And number 3, Jackson says that fascism is inherently counter-revolutionary. It exists to demolish the revolution of the working class. So, and it does this in a revolutionary manner, or in a manner that is intended to appear revolutionary. Okay. So, in my opinion, after reading Parenti and reading Jackson, I think that they really both identify very similar properties of fascism as the essence of fascism. And remember, the essence represents the stable internal relationships that make something what it is. Okay. So phenomena, on the other hand, are things that you can detect with your senses. There are lots of phenomena of fascism that lots and lots of people have identified. Fascists tend to be militaristic. Fascists tend to be jingoistic. Fascists tend to be racist. Fascists tend to have all these different phenomena. Those can help you identify fascists, perhaps, and they can tell you a lot about fascism and about the processes of fascism, but they don't tell you about the stable internal relationships that make fascists what they are. Now, the other thing that Parenti and Jackson both identify is that the material basis of fascism is capitalism. Okay, like capitalism, the capitalist mode of production, and by extension capitalists, determine the form which fascism takes, and they give the fascists power. If there were no capitalist class for the fascists to serve, they wouldn't have the power that they eventually get in places like the Third Reich or even in the USA. By extension, the fascists wouldn't operate the way they do and exist the way that they do if it weren't for the capitalist mode of production. Does that make sense? Are we all understanding? If anybody has any questions, just let us know. So hopefully we can move on. Okay. So George Jackson begins with a definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which we know George Jackson possessed because it's listed in the 99 books that George Jackson owned on the Freedom Project's website. So anyway, Jackson says, syllogism, argument with two premises and a conclusion, a logical scheme of a formal argument consisting of a major and minor premise and a conclusion which must logically be true if the premises are true. All right. So remember, George Jackson is arguing that the revolution in the USA has failed and fascism has reached its highest point in the USA. That's where we're starting here. So Jackson says, after revolution has failed, all questions must center on how a new revolutionary consciousness can be mobilized around the new set of class antagonisms that have been created by the authoritarian reign of terror. At which level of social, political, and economic life should we begin our new attack? First, we, the black partisans and their vanguard party, the old and new left alike, must concede that the workers' revolution and its vanguard parties have failed to deliver the promised changes in property relations or any of the institutions that support them. This must be conceded without bitterness, name-calling, or the intense rancor that is present. When am I going to get used to this? Where did it go? Presently building. Okay. It didn't go down nearly as far as I thought it would. Okay. There have been 2 depressions, 2 great wars, a dozen serious recessions, a dozen brush wars, crisis after economic crisis. The mass psychosocial national cohesiveness has trembled on the brink of disruption and disintegration repeatedly over the last 50 years. I remember Jackson was writing this in 1971.
Yeah.
Before COVID, before the Uprising, before the wars.
The Vietnam
in
War is
Iraq
still
and
going
Afghanistan.
on.
Right. During the Vietnam War. The mass psychosocial national cohesiveness has trembled on the brink of disruption and disintegration repeatedly over the last 50 years, threatening to fly apart from its own concentric inner dynamics. But at each crisis, it was allowed to reform itself. With each reform, revolution became more remote. This is because the old left has failed to understand the true nature of fascism. So Jackson is arguing that the left up to his time in the 1960s and 70s failed to understand fascism. Now, this is interesting. This gets to a dialectical analysis framework. We will never have a complete definition of fascism because it is in constant motion. There's a little buzzword that lets you know that this is a dialectical analysis, showing a new face to fit any particular set of problems that arise to threaten the predominance of the traditionalist capitalist ruling class. But if one were faced for the sake of clarity to define it in a word simple enough for all to understand, that word would be reform. We can make our definition more precise by adding the word economic. Economic reform comes very close to a working definition of fascist motive forces. Such a definition may serve to clarify things even though it leaves a great deal unexplained. Each economic reform that perpetuates ruling class hegemony has to be disguised as a positive gain for the upthrusting masses. Disguise, okay? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. There's a line break, but disguise, okay?
Yeah.
Has to be disguised as a positive gain for the upthrusting masses.
Yes.
This really harkens back to Parenti's idea,
Pseudo-revolution
and incoherent mass appeals that rationally serve the capitalist class.
Have to be disguised as a positive gain for the masses.
Disguise enters as a third stage of the emergence and development of the fascist state. The modern industrial fascist state has found it essential to disguise the opulence of its ruling class leisure existence by providing the lower classes with a mass consumer's flea market of its own. Listen to this. To allow a sizable portion of the new state to participate in this flea market, the ruling class has established currency controls and minimum wage laws that mask the true nature of modern fascism. Now, another thing I would add to this is me injecting my personal perspective here, so it's not Jackson's words, but colonialism. Do you know what?
It's okay.
Okay, it's just weird. Everyone can see you.
Exactly.
Hold on, I'll give you a little privacy. What are you doing, Luna? Close the door. This is so weird. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and say this. So, the colonialism and imperialism has a lot to do with the ways in which the capitalist class kind of buys out a portion of the ruling class. Okay, because in the belly of the beast in the empire, in the places like Europe and the USA, we see that there are ways in which wealth is extracted from colonized and imperialized places, and that is used in some small manners. And I think it's great, actually. Let's go back here. I think it's great that George Jackson uses this term flea market. Okay, because these concessions that are given to the working class are not actually very spectacular. They are minimal. They are paltry, but it's enough that it gets people this feeling that they're bought in with capitalism and that capitalism is benefiting them some way, and imperialism by extension, and colonialism and that sort of thing. So, it's not like you're getting like all these, oh, Luna, give me a warning so I can give you a little privacy. I don't know. I find it odd that our bathroom door is right there behind us. All right. So, okay. So I was just talking about how the different ways in which the bourgeoisie buys off elements of the proletariat.
Yeah.
The bourgeois proletariat that we were discussing earlier. So, wait, what the hell? I lost the.
You lost it.
There's like a line missing. There's a line missing. Oh, reform, the closed economy, is only a new way for capitalism to protect and develop fascism. After the German SS agents or Italian black shirts kick in the doors and herd Jews and communist partisans to death camps, after Peg Leg White's Black Legion terror and the Guardians of the Republic and their offspring legitimized the FBI, in other words, after the fascists have succeeded in crushing the vanguard elements and the threat they pose is removed, the ruling class goes on about the business of making profits as usual. So something that Jackson argues is that fascism in this third stage is typified by business as usual. To the people who are workers, especially the more privileged elements of the working class, who have had concessions made to them by capitalists, it has the feeling of business as usual.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a revolution anymore because the revolution is complete. That's what Jackson's saying.
Exactly.
Okay. The significance of the new fascist arrangement, right, lies in the fact that this business as usual is accompanied by concessions to the degenerate.
That's it.
Nothing will fundamentally change, Biden.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
the revolution is done now. Go back to business.
Right. So the significance of this new fascist business lies in the fact that it's business as usual. Okay. Okay. This is accompanied by concessions to the degenerate segment of the working class. Now, we talked last week about how I don't like this word degenerate. So let me redefine this. Okay. Yes. But what he's talking about here when he says the degenerate segment of the working class, he's talking about the elements of the working class who have lost the most revolutionary potential because they have bought in with capitalists the most. So going back to the 401k discussion, these are the people that have a nice sizable 401k. They feel very comfortable. They feel very secure. And they feel like their interests are aligned more with the capitalist class than the working class. Now, this is all false consciousness. And as we are seeing right now with the disruption in the tech aristocracy of the labor in the USA, this can get disrupted at any moment. It's a very unstable state of affairs in truth. Yeah. But they're led to believe that they have stability where they do not, right? We're talking about this this element of the working class that is bourgeoisized. And you can contrast that with the most oppressed people in society, the people who are the poorest, the workers who are the most unstable, the workers who are most likely to be going to prison, black workers, trans workers, people in poverty, that sort of thing. Okay. But anyway, the capitalist class is willing to give concessions to that segment of the working class. We can call it the bourgeois proletariat, with the aim of creating a buffer zone between the ruling class and the still potentially revolutionary segments of the lower class. So, in other words, the capitalist class is breaking up and dividing and segmenting the working class into these different strata. And then there's the higher elements of the strata that get the most concessions and the most benefits and the most privileges. And then there's the lower segments that get the most oppressed because they have the most revolutionary potential. Yep. And again, this is me adding my personal take, but I think this extends internationally. Yeah. Because the proletariat in the imperialized nations obviously has a great deal of revolutionary potential, but they're also the most subjugated through imperialist means, right? So.
I mean, the biggest enemies to fascist Germany was Korean people and Chinese people. You know, the North Koreans and the Chinese, like the very most like radicalized people that like the biggest enemy. And like the biggest enemy of Pol Pot and communists was Vietnamese.
Yeah. So, all right. So moving on, corporative ideals have reached their logical conclusion in the U.S. The new corporate state has fought its way through crisis after crisis, established its ruling elites in every important institution, formed its partnership with labor through its elites, erected the most massive network of protective agencies replete with spies, technical and animal, to be found in any police state in the world, which I would say that's still true. Yeah. The violence of the ruling class of this country and the long process of its trend towards authoritarianism and its last and highest state, fascism, cannot be rivaled in its successes by any other nation on earth today or in our history. Yeah, I would say that's still true. Now, there's a note here. I believe that this was footnoted after Jackson's death. So they just they couldn't ask Jackson what he meant, but they think that the author is probably referring to the Guardians of Liberty, an anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant group formed by ex-military officers and civil servants in New York in 1911. Among its founders was Nelson A. Miles, former chief of staff of the United States Army. So again, talking about those like very fascistic roots of the police force in the USA. With each advancement in the authoritarian process and strengthening of the ruling class's control over the system, there was a corresponding weakening of the people's and workers' movement. And intellectuals still argue whether America is a fascist country. This concern is typical of the American left's flight from reality from any truly extreme position. This is actually a manifestation of the authoritarian process seeping into its own psyche. At this stage that we are in, how can anyone question the existence of a fascist arrangement? Just consider the awesome centralization of power and the proven fact that the largest part of the gross national product is in the hands of a minute portion of the population. Of course, that's true. That's more true now, much more true now than it was when Jackson was writing. Of course, the revolution has failed. Fascism has temporarily succeeded under the guise of reform. The only way we can destroy it is to refuse to compromise with the enemy state and its ruling class. So it's kind of interesting, and it almost seems contradictory, but the point Jackson is making is that once fascists have completely taken power, those revolutionary aspects of fascism transmute into reformism. Because at this point, the fascists are securely in control. And if you think about it, it's like they can no longer uphold the conceit of revolution anymore because now they have all the power. Like, you can't have a revolution against yourself.
Yeah. Mark Levin has a question.
Is this trying to explain why the U.S. is fascist even if they are not dressed like Nazis? Yes, that's basically what this is.
Yes.
And we're just trying to kind of grapple with it and figure out, how Jackson's ideas can be applied today, really. Now, if you think about it, here's something that I've thought about. And this is like me going out on a limb. I'm not saying this is necessarily true. But what Jackson is saying is that once the fascist pseudo-revolution project is complete and the state has been completely dominated by the fascist elements, serving the interests of the bourgeoisie, after that point, you can no longer have this conceit of revolution. So then it becomes a conceit of reform. So at first, you're promising the workers, not all workers, by the way. Fascists never address all the workers because that would be class politics.
Yes.
They always segment out a portion of the workers. Like with the Third Reich, it was the Aryans, right? And then they find other portions of the working class to make bad, the enemy, Jewish people, Romani people, communists.
Yes. If under Pol Pot, it was the peasant that the Pol Pot appealed to, but then workers in the cities were terribly oppressed.
Exactly. So they find an element of the working class to have this pseudo-revolution around. And then once they seize power and take all this power, they can't have the revolution's done, right? So what do they do now? Jackson is arguing that they then turn it into a project of reform. So it's like, okay, we have the power now. And what we'll do is we will take you, the segment of workers that we were promising revolution to. Now we're going to switch to promising you reform. We're going to give you more concessions. We're going to lower your taxes. We're going to give you more money in your 401k, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's true, and I haven't personally decided yet if that's true or not, this is something maybe y'all can give me your input on. I don't know. But if that's true, it could be that neoliberalism is actually the fourth stage of fascism, where this reform process has become so entrenched, and fascism is so entrenched in the imperial core, especially in the USA, that neoliberalism has now just become this completely reform-based. And so now we almost have, and so then you have like the Trump pseudo-revolution coming in. I don't know. It's like things have gotten so complicated and wild nowadays.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of sort out what's going on.
What I can understand, what I am trying to wrap my head around is the idea that, the USA right now is the country that, after, if Nazi Germany won and been in power for so long and it got to this point.
Right.
Fascism is just so deep inside the mindset, the consciousness of the people, that they don't consider themselves fascists anymore.
Right. Or maybe they never did consider themselves fascists because they got fooled that much by nobody thinks they're the bad guy.
Yeah. The Marxist communists, at least some of them believe that they are truly communists.
Maybe some of them.
Maybe some of them.
All right. The Poor Person's Book Reviewer says we have concentration camps on the southern border and kids are still in cages. Now, something that Jackson talks about in Blood in My Eye is that, remember, they're trying to create this buffer zone, right? You can call it like a strata, where they have the privileged workers who they try to basically win over to the side of the bourgeoisie. And not just the bourgeoisie, but the most radical agenda of the bourgeoisie. But then underneath them, they have all the people who are the most subjugated and who have the most revolutionary potential. Those people continue to be subjected to a campaign of violence and terror.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the people that are in concentration camps today, the people who are in prisons.
Yes.
The people who are severely subjugated by the police, immigrant workers. There are, people, there are lots and lots houseless people. There are lots of people, trans people. Yeah. The people who are those people have the most revolutionary potential because they suffer the most under capitalism. Yes. And the campaign they're not. So capitalist tries to pacify people in this buffer zone.
Yes. And
violently subjugate the people with the most revolutionary potential at the bottom. Exactly. That's what Jackson will get to. But I wanted to front load that because that is a good point to make. And yeah, I agree that prisons are concentration camps. I agree with
Yes.
that. I mean,
the what do you call it? The Fifth Amendment or something? You know, like slavery is what do you call? I forgot the word that you use. Slavery is illegal except
in prison.
in
In the 13th Amendment,
13th
it says.
Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, you want to read the 13th Amendment real quick? Like, yeah, the 13th Amendment's a great example of certainly, that prisons are concentration camps or at least slave camps.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime. Well,
there you go. That's it.
The party
neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime.
There you go.
As my mamaw said, ignore everything after the but.
Yes, slavery was reformed, not abolished.
Right. Okay. So Jackson continues. Okay. Of course, the revolution has failed. Fascism has temporarily succeeded under the guise of reform. The only way we can destroy it is to refuse to compromise with the enemy state and its ruling class. Compromises were made in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. The old vanguard parties made gross strategic and tactical errors. At the existential moment, the last revelation about oneself, not many members of the old vanguard choose to risk their whole futures, their lives, in order to alter the conditions that Huey P. Newton describes as destructive of life. So in other words, fascists have completely, I mean, this is like something we grapple with all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to be revolutionary in the USA.
Yes, very difficult.
I mean, it's difficult to be revolutionary anywhere, but you know, you've got the FBI, you've got the NSA, you've got everybody.
You got a whole indoctrination system to like.
Yeah, your fellow workers are indoctrinated
away.
against you. Yeah, it's so reformism was allowed. The more degenerate elements of the working class, again, talking about the bourgeois. I'm just going to say the bourgeois proletariat because it fits more in line with what we've been saying lately. The bourgeois proletariat, the working class, were the first to succumb. The vanguard parties supported the capitalistic war venture in World War II. Then they helped to promote the mass consumers market that followed the close of the war, the flea market that muted the workers' more genuine demands. Today, we are faced with a clearly different set of class antagonisms, the complexities of a particularly refined fascist economic arrangement where the controlling class have co-opted large portions of the lowly working class. Now, one thing I want to say real quick, just because it might ruffle some feathers, the way in which, because he talks about World War II, the way in which the USA engaged in World War II was not anywhere near as noble as USA propaganda would have you believe.
What are you reading?
This is Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. You can find the PDF easily online if you just type in Blood in My Eye PDF if you want to follow along. And we're currently on page 121. If you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of the USA's involvement with World War II and the ways in which the USA explicitly, for instance, had capitalist connections between the bourgeoisie of the USA and the bourgeoisie of Nazi Germany, and they worked hand in glove with each other throughout the war, and the bombing runs over cities would like carefully not destroy the bourgeois interests. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of evidence of this fact in the book Black Shirts and Reds by Parenti. So yeah, it's great that Nazi Germany was defeated, but the manner in which the USA fought in that war, and especially if you contrast it with the way in which the USSR fought in that war, you will see that the USA and the imperialist powers of the West were very complicit with many aspects of Nazi Germany. And there's this myth that Germany and Japan were denazified by the USA. Totally not true.
Yep.
There were plenty of Nazis that continued their power uninterrupted in Germany. Lots of Nazi officials were brought over to the USA. There were Nazi officials on the campaign of Ronald Reagan into the 80s.
Dude, the whole system of the royal family and the government of Japan right now is still the same. You know, they started in 1947. They just wrote a new constitution in 7 days, and that was it. The whole system still remained the same. And right after, even though the U.S. claimed to win against fascism in 1945, but then in 1950, 1951, they put a fascist dictatorship in South Korea, Park Chung-hee, and they literally assigned the collaborators to the fascist Japanese, the Korean collaborators to fascist Japanese to be the leader of South Korean government. It's serve the same fucking capitalist like agenda.
Now here's a question, and okay. So the question is, if there was another French Revolution, which doesn't seem as far-fetched as many people think, do you think the French working class will continue or stop French colonialism in Africa? Now, I want to preface this by saying Luna and I, are not experts on France.
Yes, not.
Or experts on Africa. And we try to avoid too much hypothetical thinking.
Yes.
Just because, but like, I guess what I would say is what you're really asking for is a class analysis of France right now. And I guess just to tie it in with the reading that we're having, I guess you would have to look at the French working class and figure out how developed, especially the white French working class is. I really don't know. I mean, I'm not that intimate with the French working class, and you'd probably have to ask a French person. But the questions I would ask are things like, how much solidarity does the French working class have with the subjugated Northern African community in France? How much solidarity does the French white working class have with the colonized people of Africa? How much have they been bought off through concessions and material gains from the colonialism in Africa? And how much have they resisted that campaign for concession and complicitness? I don't know enough about it. My gut would tell me that the white working class in France is probably very similar to the white working class in the USA, in the sense that a lot of them have been bourgeoisized. But I'm from the USA. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask a French person if that's true or not. I really just don't know. I mean, I think it's very possible that you could definitely have it's not impossible for me to believe that you would have a revolution in France where you would have a new regime take over completely, but they would still continue to colonize Africa. It's happened many, many times. It's happened in France in the past. So, you know, I'm not going to say it's beyond the realm of possibility.
Also for Japan, Nobu Kishi basically did another Holocaust in Asia and then was handpicked by the Americans to rule post-war Japan and found the LDP, which still rules today.
Yep. And the emperor continued his power.
And I mean, Jimmy Carter backed Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge.
What's the connection there?
The USA backed the
okay. I get
it. Fascists.
Yeah. The USA, constantly backs fascists.
The only reason why the Khmer Rouge is out of existence is because of Vietnam. If we didn't do it, the Khmer Rouge still rule Cambodia to this day. Here's
a great question. Was communism popular in France? Didn't Ho Chi Minh become a communist in France originally? Did many Vietnamese study in France? Yes, and yes.
Yes.
That said, after Ho Chi Minh became if you want to know, there's a short article called The Path That Led Me to Leninism by Ho Chi Minh. And he talks about how he was trying to find a way to free the people of Vietnam when he was young and kind of a little bit more naive and didn't really know what the best way to liberate Vietnam would be. And the French communists at that time were the only ones that were talking about the colonial problem. Yeah. And that's what drew him into communism at first.
Yeah, at first in about 1920s. And then he joined, that was why he joined the second international, right? With Edward Bernstein and Rosa Luxemburg and a bunch of other people too. And then after a while, he realized that slowly it became the second international became the bourgeois proletariat kind of thing, where literally those people, they believe, like Edward Bernstein, those only care about the proletariat in the mother countries, the colonial countries. And they said that it was justifiable, it was okay for countries for European countries to go and conquer and colonize global South country if it means that the proletariat in those colonial countries can have a wealth from that. And Ho Chi Minh was like, no, that was why he actually voted for the third international, which is the Comintern. And Ho Chi Minh and Rosa Luxemburg actually met in the meeting in the second international. And it was only Rosa Luxemburg that on the side of Ho Chi Minh.
Yeah. And in a sense, you could say that once Ho Chi Minh became a communist, he very rapidly sort of outgrew the French communists in a sense, because the French were the ones that first said, hey, communism is the solution to colonialism to Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh bought into communism, learned all about it, and then was after that point, begging and trying to drag the French white workers to support the Vietnamese people and other colonized people across the French Empire. And the French working class was kind of resistant to that.
Yeah, they
So-
all bourgeois proletariat.
Yeah. And then as I mean, I feel like I can talk shit about the French working class because I'm an American and my working class sucks too.
And dude, I think that I have the most right to talk to trash on French working class because you had so much potential. You had the very early revolution where you beheaded the king and the royal family, and then Vietnamese, we learned communism from Paris French, but then now you're still very capitalist.
Yeah. I mean, when I say that when I was talking about the American working class sucks, I mean the white working class, and I'm specifically talking about the bourgeois proletariat. So there's similarities between the French working class and the American working class. But the point I'm making is, yes, the French Revolution kept Haiti as a slave colony, just as I saw a very interesting quote the other day. I can't remember who said it, but maybe somebody in the chat knows. But somebody was talking about how when the United States of America had its revolution with George Washington and Ben Franklin and all those folks, it was the construction of the first apartheid state.
Yes.
It was the construction of a slave state.
Yes. Started with the bioweapon
And
war.
well, the colonization started with bioweapon, yes, and the genocide of indigenous people, yeah. So the point being that revolution, it might have changed the arrangement of which landowning aristocratic, essentially proto-bourgeoisie held power, but it didn't really change the class dynamics at all or the relationship to the means of production.
So the U.S. Revolution served the settlers.
Right.
The French Revolution served the bourgeois proletariat of France only.
Right. Is socialism opposed to the idea of monarchy? Yeah.
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 Yes.
Anybody who says they're a socialist and not opposed to monarchy,
say pseudo-socialists.
Yeah, that's taking on some sort of fascistic dynamics there, because now you're talking about pseudo-revolution. Yeah. I mean, in fact, Marx wrote about how monarchy is like this incredible contradiction which contains democracy within it, because you have one person who has control over everybody and everybody wants control over themselves. It's like the ultimate contradiction. And it so yes, there can be no form of like socialist monarchism.
Monarchy is oppression of democracy.
Exactly. And yeah, an interesting thing Marx said was that like democracy exists within monarchy, but monarchy does not exist within democracy. So once monarchy is overthrown, that can be a terminal negation. There's not like any more need to have like dialectics with monarchy anymore after that. It's like we can get rid of monarchy completely and try our best to negate as much from the past regime of monarchy as we possibly can. And that's good.
What does monarchy have to do with capitalism or socialism?
A lot. I mean, for one thing,
it's a lot.
Capitalism emerged under monarchies in Europe.
Yes.
And monarchies exist today in capitalist countries. Monarchs still have power through capitalism. Like, for instance, in the UK.
Here's the thing, too. The inherent problem in monarchy or capitalism is having a ruling class over other class. Okay, monarchy is the royal families that rule over the peasant. And then it's the noble families that rule all over the country like that. So like have a ruling class. Capitalism, the same thing. It's a capitalist class who has money and wealth that rule over the working class. Meanwhile, socialism is the democracy and the power to the people where there's gonna be no ruling class anymore.
The point of communism is very simple. The point of communism is to eliminate class altogether.
Yeah.
And the point of monarchism and capitalism is to maintain a class.
To maintain a class.
Okay. The Poor Person's Book Reviewer says these are joke questions. I don't think it's such a bad thing to answer these questions because there are a lot of little primrose paths that fascists can lead people down by confusing people about things like this. And especially class reductionists can use situations like this and all kinds of situations to confuse people and move them into a fascist path when they're initially interested in socialism. So I don't mind talking about these things. And also Marx and Engels wrote about these things, so they must have thought it was important at their time. So at least talking about it in terms of history and everything, I don't think that they're bad things to talk about. Now, let's move back to our reading, though, because we do only have about 20 minutes left, and I want to get through. We haven't even gotten to the part that I really wanted to read yet.
All right.
So today we're faced with a clearly different set of class antagonisms, the complexities of a particularly refined fascist economic arrangement where the controlling elites have co-opted large portions of the lowly working class. When we ask ourselves, where will we attack the enemy state, we are answered at the productive point. The next logical question is, with whom and what will we attack the fortified entrance of the productive and distributive system in a nation of short-sighted, contented, conservative workers? Obviously, the fascist movement is counter-revolution at its very center.
Yes.
Fascist reformism is a calculated response to the classic scientific socialist approach to revolution through positive mobilization of the working class. From its inception, the fascist arrangement has attempted to create the illusion of a mass society in which the traditional capitalist ruling class would continue to play its leading role. Parenti talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
That's like what Black Shirts and Reds is about.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's absolutely part of the fascist program and part of the bourgeois propaganda program in the USA. There's no doubt about that.
Literally, like in Japan, the fascism in Japan was to maintain the freaking power of the royal family.
And it's all about this monism where you try to convince this strata of the working class that their interests are aligned with the bourgeoisie, and that gets them to fight for the radical interests of the bourgeoisie. A mass society that is not a mass society, Jackson writes, a mass society of authoritarians whose short-term martial interests are perfectly suited to the development of the perfect totalitarian state and centralized economy. The most precise definitions of fascism involve the concept of scientific capitalism or controlled capitalism. You could call it technocracy, maybe.
Yeah.
A sophisticated totalitarian learned response to the challenge of egalitarian scientific socialism. After its successful establishment in Spain, Portugal, Greece, South Africa, and the USA, we are faced with the obvious question of how to raise a new consciousness. So Jackson's struggling with, like, how do we have a revolution now when capitalism, whether you call it fascist or not, I think Jackson definitely has a point to be made, to be listened to, that regardless of whether you want to call it fascist or liberal or neoliberal or whatever you want to call it, the capitalist class power is incredibly entrenched in these imperialist nations. And the prospects of revolution have been heavily subdued. Okay. I think that's fair to say.
The question is what is to be done.
Right. Exactly. Which is the most important question.
What is
honestly,
to be done?
We could debate all day long about whether we're talking about fascism or liberalism or neoliberalism or social democracy or whatever. But the real question is, what do we do? We know that these are enemies of our class. What do we do? We are faced with the task of raising a positive mobilization of revolutionary consciousness in a mass that has gone through a contrapositive authoritarian process. The new vanguard elements seem to agree with withdrawal from the enemy state and its social, political, and economic life is the first step towards its destruction. So he's basically talking about cultural revolution right now.
Yeah.
He's talking about what Gramsci called cultural revolution, which is building a counterculture to the bourgeois civil society. Yeah. So I don't know if he's talking about Mao's conception of cultural revolution or not, but he's definitely talking about the Gramscian form right now, I believe.
Yes.
The new vanguard element seems to agree that the new revolutionary consciousness will develop in the struggles of withdrawal. However, after this point, agreement grows vague and is all but lost in the sea of contradiction. The contention turns on one primary question, the scope and range of violence within the revolutionary process. After the lengthy and clearly unnecessary ideological battle that laid to rest a direct approach to revolution by the white or black worker, we're now faced with an equally unnecessary ideological battle over which of the various communal revolutionary cultural approaches has the stronger revolutionary validity. Something Jackson argued for a lot was having what he called like an intercity commune. So basically what the Black Panthers did, and Jackson was affiliated with the Panthers, basically building a commune in the city that gave, specifically in this case, Black people something to hold on to, something to protect. Yeah. Because his point was that the working class, and especially the Black workers, were so alienated that they had nothing that they could hold on to, and they didn't feel like they had anything to like defend against capitalism. Yeah. So by building a commune that actually gives workers some material benefits rooted in socialism, you build something that workers will be willing to defend, and you kind of start to build a counterculture through that material process. Yeah. If that makes sense.
This donation.
Oh, we got a donation? Oh, shit. Sorry. McClubbin, thank you so much for the very reliable donation. We appreciate it. Of course, you have no obligation to donate every week, but we very much appreciate that you do. It says, great discussion. Thank you, comrades. Thank you, McClubbin. We really appreciate it. Glad you're enjoying the discussion. I hope you're getting something out of it. Thank you so much. We do appreciate you. All right. So the problem is compounded by the almost apolitical withdrawal of the growing Weatherman faction. So the Weathermen were basically a predominantly white revolutionary movement in the 60s and early 70s. I think they actually went into the 80s, but they were pretty much gutted by then. and their estranged allies on campus to organize food gardens and a life of sex, music, and drugs. Their Nietzschean Hegelian withdrawal mimics the European historical experience of the last 5 generations. So he's throwing shade right now on white leftists, which I think, looking back in the 60s and 70s, kind of rightfully so. I think there's plenty of critique to be leveled there. Mm-hmm. In our equation, this must be considered the minor side of syllogism. Though revolution is in fashion, the realistic cohesive synergism seems as yet impossibly remote. On the other side of the equation, we have Huey Newton's concept of black communes set well within the huge population centers of the enemy state. This concept accepts any level of violence that will be necessary to enforce the demands of the people and workers. These communes will be tied to one another by a national and international vanguard party and join with the world's other revolutionary societies. They are the obvious answer to all theoretical and practical questions and problems about an American revolution, a revolution that will be carried out principally by blacks. The question I've asked myself over the years runs this way. Who does the most dying, most of the work, most of the time in prison? Who is the hindmost in every aspect of social, political, and economic life? Who has the least short-term interest or no interest at all in the survival of the present state? In this condition, how can we believe the possibility of a new generation of enlightened fascists who would dismantle the basis of their hierarchy? Just how many Americans are willing to accept the physical destruction of some parts of their fatherland so that the rest of the land in the world, that's a key part of that, might survive in good health? How can the black industrial worker be induced to carry out a valid workers' revolutionary policy? What and who will guide him? The commune, the central citywide revolutionary culture. But who will build the commune that will guide the people into a significant challenge to property rights? Carving out a commune in the central city will involve claiming certain rights as our own, are out front. So now Jackson's getting into his ideas about the solution, which is just basically building a radical counterculture with a material basis in the inner city commune. And we got about 15 minutes left, so I think we'll finish the reading there. And if you want to read more, it's called Blood in My Eye. You can find it online for free very easily. Blood in My Eye PDF. Just Google that. There's like several versions of it out there.
Can we have an announcement of good news? The donation that we made? Yeah,
let's talk about a communal program in Vietnam. We had a fundraiser. I'm not asking you to donate this time because we've already made the goal. Hold on, I lost the dang link. Oh, tell us a little bit about what the fundraiser's for.
I am always been a member of the the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union, and lately I've been in touch with a group of Communist Youth Union students in Da Nang city where we live, and they just had they are planning to have a volunteer trip to a very remote area in Quảng Nam province, all the way up in the mountain, super extremely remote. And the plan was that we wanted to help to build a community in the village of ethnic minority over there of Go-To people, build a cement road and a cement playground, and build a library, and give poor children out there clothes and books, some gifts like that. And we were raising donations for this volunteer campaign.
So it's a 10-day campaign.
Yes.
It's about 5 hours from Da Nang in the mountains of Quang Nam, right?
Yes.
And the village is predominantly Go-To ethnic minority, and they are we reached the goal. So at first we had a $500 goal. We hit that goal, and then the leaders of the youth union chapter that we're working with were like, hey, the price of cement went up.
Yeah.
And we need a lot of cement because they're literally building roads.
He was very, very happy when the first goal was reached. He's like, oh my God, this is so amazing.
Yeah. We hit it fast too. Yeah. We hit it in like 24 hours, right?
Yeah, it's like 2 days, something like that.
So anyway, then we hit the stretch goal of $850 yesterday.
Yes.
So we don't need your donation. We've got all the money we need for that. We're passing that on to them as soon as it gets transferred into Luna's Vietnamese bank account.
I will be joining this campaign for 10 days.
Oh yeah, Luna's going to be there, and she's going to make a video.
Be there.
Yeah. That's an important point.
Yes.
So Luna will, all the money that we raise, by the way, is going to materials for the infrastructure building.
Yes,
so like cement, rebar, tool, like, I don't know, whatever bricks and stuff like that.
Sand and rocks.
Yeah. And they're very concerned that they document everything. They're very concerned that it's all financially documented. So later on, we're going to post the receipt that they've received the funds, and we're going to post their receipts for what they spent it on, and they're going to write a statement of gratitude on the Give Butter.
Yes.
But yeah, that's it. So in the future, if you want to donate, they'll be doing these things. They do these things all the time, so
Yes.
you'll have an opportunity in the future. But that's it for now.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you to everybody who donated. If you happen to be watching this right now, we really appreciate you. We hit that goal way faster than we thought. We thought we'd have to have a fundraising
You're
live
right.
stream.
Like now, I plan to have fundraising a live stream like now this week. I thought we already hit the goal like
Yeah.
twice. Like amazing.
Yeah, so that's great. So I'm glad to see the international communist community come together and support that awesome project.
Yeah, it's in
And-
Vietnam, so like your dollars like go a long way here.
Yeah, they will. They will. They really will. What do you say to other socialists who say that socialists are too insular and academic in their language and as a result insulate themselves from normies? Well, the word normie is a little insulating right off the bat.
Right off the bat.
But I mean, there's truth to that. Yeah, we have to tailor
Yeah.
our communication to our audiences. Now, if I'm talking to somebody who's already basically a communist and basically bought in, I am going to use more, like the reason we have such a developed language and jargon and that sort of thing, and this whole system of dialectical materialist analysis that we use is because it has proven to be a really precise but comprehensive way of looking at the world. And that's why we have all this jargon. And if I'm talking to other communists, it's like a shorthand.
Yeah.
And if I say contradiction to another communist, they're going to know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I say contradiction to somebody who hasn't been initiated into communism with all the jargon and everything like that, they're going to think it means something completely different. So I have to be careful. And it's a headache when I'm making videos, to be honest,
Yeah.
and for Luna as well, because we have to balance that, because some portions of our audience,
very like
when we do these live streams, we're talking to like comrades, and
Yes.
we pretty much realize that. Now, we don't mind taking the time when there are people who are new
Mhm.
to try to explain things more detailed and
Mhm.
go back over stuff that most of the audience already knows.
Absolutely.
But for the most part, in the live streams, we feel like we're kind of talking to comrades. It's like a pretty small niche audience,
Yeah.
right? But when we're making our videos for thousands of people, it's a lot more of a headache, because we have to
Yes.
think like, okay, these people aren't going to really know what dialectical materialism is.
You have to
That's
go back
why,
and explain all the terms.
yeah. But like, it's a dialectic,
Mhm.
okay? Because on the one hand, yes, we need to be conscious of the millions of people out there who are working class people who don't know any of this shit. But on the other hand, we have to be educating them
Yes.
how to see the world coherently
Yes.
and see the world as it really is and eradicate false consciousness. And
Yeah.
that means teaching them dialectical materialist analysis,
So
in my
do
opinion.
not fall to be a populist and a tailist.
Yeah.
Means that just say whatever the heck you think the millions of people think. And I think I want to put a point to this, because when they're talking about, when John is talking about this, it's a very Western centric or US centric, because it is true that those terms, those words are very strange in the concept of in the USA or in the West generally, but in Vietnam, since we've been having like the socialist education since the 50s, when we talk about this thing, it's like a common sense. Nearly every single student in Vietnam learn in dialectical materialism, in communism and Marxism, Leninism, understand it very well. So actually talk like this is our normal daily talk. So for example, when I translate, the book, the Marxist dialectical materialism book, and my mom, like a 60-year-old lady in the village in the middle of nowhere of my hometown in Vietnam, she asked me like, hey, what's the book about? I said like, well, it's a book about dialectical materialism and the quality, the quantity, and how the quantity and the quantity like have a relationship with each other. And she, 60-year-old lady, farmer, said like, oh yeah, that's true, that's right. And then my dad is like a worker, like a truck driver, said like, oh yeah, so you talk about Marxism in this, huh? So like, for example, it's like, even in a comedy show in Vietnam, is like a stand-up comedy, and there's something like where there's a question in for the topic of the players are like, you have to talk, but in a philosophy kind of style. Immediately, the comedians in the play, they use Marxist Leninist philosophy style talking.
That's the first philosophy that comes to their mind.
That's the very first philosophy that comes to our mind.
Yeah.
That's the difference in our societies.
Well, and it's because, Ho Chi Minh said that in order to develop socialism, you have to develop socialist people with socialist values.
Yeah. So
and
these
can
people
do socialist,
who understand socialism.
Yeah, and socialist ideology and philosophy.
Mm.
I like this comment from the Good Morty. The language is technical because we're trying to be technical.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about complicated shit, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
now, was it Ho Chi Minh who said that? Yeah, Ho Chi Minh said that it's not necessary to go to a mountain village that's struggling to grow their crops and talk to them about economic theory.
Exactly.
Like that's not necessary.
Or the world situation.
And it can be counterproductive, right?
Exactly.
So, because he was talking about, he had a cadre training manual or something like that. And he was talking about how sometimes these Vietnamese communists would be going to these remote mountain villages where they're trying to like eke out a living and survive. And they would sit down and give them like 3-hour lectures about like Marxian economics. And Ho Chi Minh's like, don't do that. Like that's not the way to approach that. You have to tailor your discussions to the audience and to the people.
And here's the thing, to even scientists in natural science like math or physics or chemistry, before starting everything, they have to state all of the terms and with the definitions on it. So people would read that report, understand exactly what they're talking about when they said this. We are social scientists. Means that we have to define those terms before, like contradiction, dialectical, something like that.
In education, we call that scaffolding.
Scaffolding.
Yeah. You want to scaffold. You want to make sure that before you talk about these higher level concepts, that people are like on the same page about the lower level concepts. The other thing is that I wish that in the West we wouldn't be so metaphysical and semantic about the definitions of words. Because if I say this is what I mean when I say this word, just accept that for the purposes of our discussion. Yeah, I mean you don't have to sit there. It doesn't there is no metaphysically perfect definition for any word, and I don't know, just argument like what words mean is such a waste of time. Rohan says the masses understand more than you think, just in different words, and yeah. But I think there is it's like you have to do both at the same time. You have to speak to the masses on their level, but you also have to train the masses in communist ideology. These are two things that go together, I think. And the more we develop, like in Vietnam, they're at such a point where, Luna's mother, who's a 60-year-old former tailor, can watch a comedy show where they're talking about Marxist philosophy and she totally gets all the jokes. Whereas all those jokes would fly over the head of the USA proletariat because they haven't been developed so much in the USA. So that's where you can kind of see the differences in development between the Vietnamese working class and the working class in the USA, right? Yes. So we have two jobs to do at the same time, which is build support for the revolution, which is going to require a lot of plain talk, while also teaching people how to do revolution, which is going to require more of the technical language. It's a difficult job. It took
Vietnam 70 years to come to this point. So yes, not easy.
Now somebody asked, hold on. This actually goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. So I'm going to answer this question. What do you think of leftists who believe we should adopt Trump's style of communication to apply to the working class? Let me just say this. Stop looking to reactionaries for ideas and models, okay? Yes. There are better models that are communists. So, maybe what they mean by, I'm going to assume that this is what they mean by this, is that Trump talks very plainly and he doesn't use a lot of big words. He's not very fancy. You know who else was like that?
Ho Chi Minh.
Ho Chi freaking Minh talked very plainly. He said that, when you talk, a child should be able to understand what you're saying.
Yes.
So we have a communist model, a communist role model who wrote very eloquently and simply and plainly, but still managed to put forth these complex technical ideas. Go read some of Ho Chi Minh's political writing. Now his poetry was a little bit more out there, but sometimes, but his stuff that was, political writing was very approachable. His speeches were very, they use simple language, but they still communicated complex ideas.
He never goes around the bush.
Trump, what Trump does is he lies.
Yes.
He uses simple words to communicate simple ideas that are wrong.
It's so simple that it's a fast dog whistle.
Like I would never, why would you use Trump as a model when you could use Ho Chi Minh? When Ho Chi Minh uses simple language to express the truth in a technically precise manner, whereas Trump uses simple language to lie and deceive the working class. Like, why would choose your fighter? I choose Ho Chi Minh every fucking time.
I mean, here's the thing. It is true that Trump does use simple words to appeal to the working class people, to fool them,
to deceive them.
That's
the important part there. You're missing the most important part. I was like, oh, I like Trump. He's a plain talker. It's like he's a plain liar.
Just the fact that he's plain doesn't mean that you have to like him.
I mean, it's just fascinating to me that people go down that path.
The same as the MAGA communist thing.
It's all absurd, and it's all just a path to fascism. That's what it is. Got a super chat from Chima Madhu. I hate it when people in my community try to separate chattel slavery from capitalism and claim they have nothing to do with each other.
Oh my god.
Well, okay, like hold on. They have a lot of course they have a lot of overlap. Yeah. I mean, if you read Du Bois, it's like chattel slavery was a form of primitive accumulation that capitalists used in the earliest stages of capitalism. And in that sense, capitalism emerged from slave society. The fucking Industrial Revolution, okay, was primarily in what? In textile factories.
Yes.
What was the textile that those factories were predominantly manufacturing? Cotton. Where was the cotton coming from? The USA. Who was picking the cotton? Slaves. Enslaved people. So you cannot separate. Yeah, I mean, like that's a metaphysical thing to just say, like, okay, we've got chattel slavery here. We've got the capitalism here. They have absolutely nothing to do with each other. They have a very strong dialectical relationship with each other.
It existed because of capitalism. That's like Europe. They needed cotton to make fabric to sell so they can make profit. And then who picked the cotton? Slaves in the USA. The same as Japan.
Mm-hmm.
People who keep talking about how fascism in Japan doesn't have nothing to do with like the capitalism or something. It's like literally Japan, they industrialized themselves in the First World War, and then because of they industrialized too fast and they didn't have enough raw material, that was why they go out and they conquer other countries in Asia. The whole point, and then they join the Axis. The whole point is that they can steal raw material, bring back to the home country, and feed capitalists in Japan.
Primitive accumulation.
Literally fascism.
Primitive accumulation marched on long after the origin of capitalism. And one of the things fascists do to get in good with capitalists and to get capitalists to give them more power is they promise those capitalists another round of increased primitive accumulation. So there's a very strong correlation between capitalism in its current stage and in its stage, 300 years ago in its origins, and slavery and colonialism and primitive accumulation.
And even like it's a more tricky story about how can you see Pol Pot serve capitalism? Because like if you just look on the scope of Cambodia itself, it seemed like it didn't serve capitalism because like Pol Pot literally destroyed everything, destroyed the economy, and just built farm like concentration farm.
Okay, slavery existed long before capitalism. Slavery existed in the form that it existed in chattel slavery because of capital. So the material basis of chattel slavery was capitalism. Okay. Yes, slavery existed before capitalism, but there's a material base. If the material basis for slavery is feudalism or the Roman slave society,
ruling class,
then the form that slavery takes, okay, it's all about the relationship to the means of production. The form that slavery takes is determined by the mode of production.
Yes.
So the material basis for chattel slavery was capitalism. Okay. The material basis for slavery
exists in Vietnam because of colonialism too.
Right.
Yes.
Which is a form
of imperialism, in a sense that like the French colonialists came to Vietnam and they started their plantation, their coffee plantation, black pepper plantation, and they forced Vietnamese farmers to leave their farm and go work in plantation and literally paid them literally close to nothing.
So
enslave us.
So John Brown agrees with us. Says chattel slavery is fairly particular to capitalism.
Yeah.
And so I mean that's what's very important to understand is that the material basis of the relationship between the means of production, in other words, who owns the means of production, very much determines what form other social phenomena like slavery will take. So
and also like it doesn't mean that capitalism created slavery.
Right.
But it's like they intertwine each
developed
other.
it.
They serve with each other.
Capitalism and slavery developed one another.
Oh, you finish your point yet? I want to finish about the Pol Pot point about it's harder to see how Pol Pot serve capitalists. But like if domestically in Cambodia itself, we don't see that they serve the capitalist class, the ruling class. But if you look into like in the international kind of scope of it, Pol Pot and communism was backed by both Jimmy Carter, you're saying Jimmy Carter and China under Deng Xiaoping. Why is that? It is that because they wanted to destroy Indochina because of the Sino-Soviet split and the Cold War between the USA. the Cold War between the USA and the USSR. Now how you see Khmer Rouge serve the capitalist class here?
We got raided by Silver Spook.
Oh,
Welcome, Silver Spook Raiders.
we have to
Glad
go
to
a
see
little
you.
bit longer then.
Luna has a stream coming up with Silver Spook soon, right?
Yeah.
About was it LGBTQ issues in indigenous
Yes.
society, something like that?
Yes.
Interesting. Good
Yes.
stuff coming up. Sorry, I'm just reading through the chat here. Oh, you got some starred chats here?
Yes.
Let's see.
In India, fascism is also about how to capture this section of a bit materially well-off working class and make them think their interests are with economic elites.
There you go.
Yeah, we're talking about the bourgeois proletariat.
Oh my gosh, the horse train has also arrived.
Oh
That's
my
2
goodness.
raids. We got
Oops.
Famous Horse and Silver Spook raiding in. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. You missed the meat of the show, but now we're having dessert.
Yeah.
We're just kind of chatting with all of you, really. We just talked a lot about fascism in the USA and the nature of revolution in the USA and the ways in which capitalists have bought off a strata of the proletariat, the bourgeois proletariat, to serve their interests.
We are in the stage of capitalism where we have gone beyond the event horizon, and the winners of capitalism turn out to kill people for profit. Not a big surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that they've always been killing people for profit,
Sure.
but unfortunately, but okay. Wow, that horse train is really training and horsing it up.
Ooh. Welcome everybody. Hi everybody. I'm Luna. We're talking about the riot in not a riot, the uprising in France and fascism.
That's right. Wait, what? Oh, sorry. I just saw the thing phrase. Okay, yeah. So let's talk a little bit more. Okay, so let's. I guess now would be a good time to synthesize.
Yeah,
some things about this situation in France. So, I mean, in France, it's pretty clear to see that if you're not familiar with what's going on in France, basically there's a population of people from Northern Africa who've been in France since the 60s and 70s. And they've been brutally dominated while being so they've been basically forced into these like ghetto areas where they're cut off from French communities while at the same time being forced to assimilate into French society. So they're totally second-class citizens, and they are just, really brutally oppressed by capitalism, by imperialism, by colonialism. And the white French working class is being, I want to show this to the let's go back to this point. I think the Raiders would be interested in this, what we found on Google Trends.
Oh, yeah.
So look at the ways in which people are being propagandized to, okay?
Show the before first. I want to show the before.
Yeah, this is before.
No, this is
new. It is?
Yeah.
Good catch.
Because I have a, visualization ability.
All right, we'll put it on screen.
On screen. There you go.
So this is during the pension uprising, okay? Remember back in January through March, there were a lot of mostly white French people who were
not all, but mostly
upset predominantly about the pension plan being changed undemocratically in France. And so we looked at a Google Trends report of France riots versus France protests, and you'll see overwhelmingly
5-1,
100 to 2, 5-1, yeah. That's almost 9-1.
Yeah.
The media and social media and all the websites that Google tracks were using the language protests. The red line is protests.
Yes.
And the blue line is riots. Whereas there were confrontation with police, things being lit on fire, cars being overturned, all this stuff. But overwhelmingly, these were described as protests, not riots. And now if you look at the same comparison to the last 7 days, you can see that things have completely flipped. And now
look at that.
It's like a 10 to 1 ratio. They're using the word riots instead of the word protests.
Yes.
So, and Luna and I made the argue that this is based on racism, yes, but it's also based on the fact that the pension uprising was much less of a existential threat to the French and international bourgeoisie, whereas having imperialized, colonized people who have been ghettoized and turned into and who have the most revolutionary potential by virtue of being so oppressed, according to George Jackson, anyway, who we just read, when they're rising up and demanding equality, that's much more of an existential threat to capital. Right.
Yeah,
so that's why they get phrased as, that's why they get counted as riots. And yes, the graph does top out at 100. Yeah. That's the way that Google Trends works.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess. I don't really know why they do it that way, but that's
yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that I thought that was interesting. It tells you a little about the doctrinal language that's being used when you talk about white French workers rising up about pensions versus when you talk about North African French workers rising up for more general equality. Yeah. Did you search in English? Yes. I'm talking about so we're talking about the Anglosphere. Yes. I mean, which is more frightening to the international bourgeoisie? Which is more frightening? Is it French workers who are a little bit upset about pensions and want to kind of have some reform? Or is it colonized people who are rising up? I mean, that's going to be as scary for an American capitalist as it is for an English capitalist, as it is for a French capitalist. Yeah. Because if pension reform catches on in England or the USA, they can deal with that.
They can deal with
that. The bourgeoisie can absolutely survive through that. Mm-hmm. But if colonized, racialized, ghettoized people rising up and demanding equality catches on in England
that's the whole
and the
destruction
United
of
States,
the system, man. That's why they
it's
call
way
it
more
riot.
of an existential threat, yes. So, all right. Let's just check through the chat here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
A long time ago, haven't you and Luna ever seen any black people in Vietnam? And if so, are they most Americans? A lot.
I see a lot of black people, but they're not mostly Americans from what I see.
They're not mostly American, to be honest.
I think most of them are from Africa, if I'm not mistaken. So, but yeah, there's quite a few black folks that live in Vietnam.
I just saw a couple yesterday.
Yeah. So, and in fact, if you go to YouTube and I think if you search like being black in Vietnam or the black experience in Vietnam, there's a lot of videos.
Yeah.
Because a lot of black folks have asked if it would be safe to travel here and that sort of thing. I absolutely can say it would be safe for you to travel here. Yes. But as far as what it's like to be black here, I would recommend you go look up those videos and see what actual black folks have to say about their experiences here, rather than trying to ask us when we're not black. So, but there's a lot of content out there to that effect. So.
I agree with Jackson. It's Josh Jackson. Mm-hmm. If you imagine the Axis powers had won World War II 80 years later, I think that their society would look a lot like present-day U.S. Unquestioned neoliberalism with racial and other forms of oppression being normalized.
So normalized
they go completely unnoticed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to speculate. You know. It's not a BREADCAST if Luna doesn't leave at least 3 times in the middle of the show. But yeah, it's hard to speculate exactly what would have happened, you know, if the Axis had won World War II. But certainly I could definitely. Oh my gosh, hold on a second. I'm gonna mute. Okay, I think we got a delivery. So okay, so anyway, that is, I think that's pretty much all the chats that we were going to run through here. Does anybody? Oh, sorry. I'm much better at streaming when I have Luna by my side. I am not great at solo streaming. But they say that, oh, sorry. I'm just reading the chat here. Bunch of gunshots outside while you're trying to watch a stream. Uh-oh. Hope you're okay. I hope that's not a serious situation. I'm doing a lot better. You think I'm doing better now while I'm struggling to read the chat and think of things to talk about? I'm trying to think if there's any. Okay, so I guess what we can talk about is next week. So if you are just joining us through a stream, through a raid, Jesus Christ, I'm so bad at talking alone. What we'll be talking about next week, if you just join us in the raid, is we'll be going back to our series on discussing the origins of fascism. So last week and the week before that, we were talking about a French philosopher named George Sorel. Sorel was somebody who invented this strain of syndicalism, which was then used as a foundation by Mussolini to build well, not just Mussolini, but other fascists like Action Française in France and Cercle Prud'homme and other proto-fascist organizations, and then by Mussolini to build fascism. So what we've been doing is trying to analyze the origins of fascism to understand how fascism existed then and how it exists today in sort of a continuity. We've been trying to identify like essential properties of fascism, common characteristics of fascism, and trying to understand why it has transformed so much throughout the last, century plus. And today we've been talking about whether or not fascism exists in the USA state. Certainly fascism exists in the USA, but is the state of the USA fascist? That was what today's stream was about. And I guess if you want to see that whole discussion, you could just back it right up to the beginning. But next week we will go back to the discussion of the origins of fascism, read more about Sorel and syndicalism, and especially mythology and how mythology was used as a basis for sort of the fascist conception of history. And I think it will be a good discussion. We've definitely, what's the text we've been reading, just in case some people might want to read ahead. I don't know. Some of you nerds. We've been reading a text on Sorel called, where is it at? Yes. Jack J. Roth wrote, hey, Luna's back.
I'm back.
Luna, you're back. Save me. I'm so bad at solo streaming.
Oh my gosh.
The Roots of Italian Fascism, Sorel and Sorelismo by Jack J. Roth. So if you want to check that out, you can read that. We'll continue that next week. So Dave wants to join us. Dave said, wow, that's interesting. I'd like to join next week for that.
Oh, cool.
Well, great. That will be Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern United States time.
Yes.
And also, Luna will be having Mooncast. Well, actually, no, wait. I will be having Mooncast with. Oh, maybe we shouldn't tell them that because the Mooncast viewers hate me so much. But
I love you.
Wednesday. No, wait. Is it Wednesday? Tuesday night. Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. We'll be having Luna's weekly stream Mooncast. Luna might actually not be able to make it because she's going to be going to join the Ho Chi Minh Youth Union in that campaign in Quang Nam we were talking about.
Pictures.
But Luna will send pictures and updates about that situation, the campaign there. And I will be reading selected work from Ho Chi Minh. And we can talk about that together. I haven't selected the work yet, but it will come from Vijay Prasad's book of translations that he edited. So that's on the agenda for next week. What did we get delivered?
Beer.
Nice. That's the best news. That's a great piece of news to wrap up on. I love dark beer, and it's kind of hard to find in Vietnam. So Luna is kind enough to help me order it online. Rohan says, as a Mooncast viewer, I think you're okay. That's about as good as I can expect.
Okay.
If everyone thinks I do okay Tuesday night, then I'll be very happy with my performance. Do you apply this critique of syndicalism to the IWW? That is a complicated question. But especially the IWW today, I don't think has these links to Sorelism, and I haven't really gone back and researched the IWW. Something I've been sort of seeing is that the syndicalists of the French was somewhat disconnected from the syndicalists in Spain and the USA. But honestly, that I don't know. I haven't really done enough analysis. But I'm specifically talking about Sorel's conception of syndicalism. So I guess the answer to my question would be, it depends on to what extent Sorelism was used by the IWW. It doesn't seem to me in my research and investigation of the IWW that Sorel was somebody they were talking about a lot, especially not in their publications. Because when I did my documentary series on the IWW in the 1910s, I read like dozens and dozens and dozens of their publications and newspapers and public and pamphlets and that sort of thing, and I never saw a single reference to Sorel. So I mean, maybe there's an influence there that I'm not seeing, but so far I haven't discovered anything like that. But so yeah. Okay. Well. Anything else? I don't know. Anything else, Luna?
I heard about Vijay Prasad's book. How is it? It's good.
Yeah, I'm actually reading it right now. So far, so good. I mean, Luna could probably tell you more about whether it's an accurate translation or not. But I've been enjoying it. So, Yeah, so thanks for joining us, everybody, especially the Raiders. We're really glad you could be here. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channels. You can find us on all of our channels. We have way too many. If you like Twitch, we've got twitch.tv/non-compete. It's twitch.tv/LunaOy.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, no, it's Luna_Oy.
Luna_Oy.
Twitch.tv/Luna_Oy. YouTube.com/LunaOy is Luna's main channel where you can find her video essays. YouTube.com/non-compete is our collective channel where I do video essays along with other members of our cooperative. And then there's youtube.com/non-compete live and youtube.com/LunaOy live. So those are all of our many channels. If you really enjoyed it, you can support us on Patreon and Camaraderie. You will be supporting not only our video content and our live streams, but you also be supporting Luna's translation work on important things like the Vietnam curriculum on dialectical materialism, and she's now working on the translation on historical materialism.
Actually, the translation is done. We need to
work
on the rough translation is to the final translation and annotation.
Well, on the one hand, it's great that you finished the rough translation so fast, but on the other hand, let's not build expectations too much because the editing and annotating and illustrating is going to take quite a while. But before the end of the year, we hope to have that out. So all the links to that are in the youtube.com/non-compete live description. And I guess that's it for the moment. Thank you for watching. We're very glad you could be here. And
thank you for all your super chats and donations.
Yeah, we're on Patreon and Camaraderie if you want to support us there. We could use the support. You're the reason that we were able to do these streams. Let me just make sure we didn't miss any donations. We did not on my end. Did you miss any? All right, folks. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Solidarity.